Welcome everyone to Beauty and the Beasts. Today I'm going to do some skincare while talking about one of the most bizarre traditions, which is actually super creepy. You know, for most people, one of the happiest days of their life is their wedding day. It's that one day you pour your heart, your time, your money into just to make it perfect, because it's the day two people become one. But what if you got kidnapped by strangers and forced to marry someone who wasn't even alive? Yeah, today's story isn't about someone's personal nightmare. It's about a tradition, one that some people might have even forgotten about, called the ghost wedding. Yeah, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Usually, weddings are these beautiful ceremonies shaped by culture, religion, and tradition, right? Take a Christian wedding. You stand there, say your vows, promise to share everything with each other, and usually end it with "till death do us apart." Because in Christianity, it's believed you get one life, one soul, and after death, you move on, either to heaven or hell. But if you look back, way back, especially in East Asian cultures, people believed something very different. They believed in reincarnation, that life and death weren't an end. They were just part of an endless cycle until your soul finally reached eternity. And marriage wasn't just for this life. It could even carry over into the next. In Hindu belief, for example, a married couple is to stay together across 7 lives. But what happens if someone dies before they even get a chance to marry? That's where the idea of ghost marriages started to take root. In traditional Chinese beliefs, when someone dies, they don't just disappear. Their life continues in a parallel world, almost like a reflection of ours. There's money, there's houses, there's marriages. And that's why people burn paper money, paper houses, and even paper servants, all to send to the dead. And if you go back even further to the days when kings and queens ruled, it wasn't unusual for royals to be buried with their wives, concubines, guards, horses, even their jewelry, so they wouldn't be alone in the afterlife. But ghost marriages, they are a little more complicated than that. The earliest known ghost marriages date back to the pre-Qin period. And here we're talking around 221 to 207 BC, and maybe even earlier. Stretching back almost 3,000 years. It mostly happened among the wealthy, because even in the afterlife, class and status apparently mattered. The idea came from 2 key philosophies, yin and yang. The belief that balance is necessary for harmony, and the belief that life after death is just a continuation of this world. A Chinese folklore expert, Huang Jingchun, once explained it like this. Ghost marriages weren't just about the dead. They were about the living, about giving peace of mind to the family left behind. But there was also fear, because it was believed that if someone died unmarried, a bachelor or a bachelorette, their soul would be lonely, restless, and that loneliness could turn into anger. A spirit with no partner might come back to the living world, bringing misfortune to their family, or even their descendants, until they were properly married off in the spirit world. These days, if you ask people about ghost marriages, most people would say it's not really about the dead anymore. It's more about the living, about easing the hearts of those left behind. And think about it. Imagine losing your child before they even got the chance to live out their dreams, before you ever got to see them standing at the altar, smiling, getting married. That grief, that regret, it doesn't just go away. In a way, ghost marriages became kind of bereavement therapy, a way for parents to give their children what they couldn't while they were alive. And even now, a lot of Chinese communities still quietly keep this tradition alive. But the truth is, no one really knows for sure how it all started. We only have guesses based on what society was like back then and what people needed emotionally to survive their losses. Even so, ghost marriages are often seen as strange, superstitious, something people don't always talk about openly. But what's really fascinating is this idea. It wasn't just in China. It showed up in places like France and South Sudan, too. Different cultures, different details, but the heart of it was the same. People trying to heal, trying to fix something broken by death. Still, today we're going to stick with the Chinese tradition, because honestly, it's one of the richest and most detailed versions out there. Ghost marriages are especially common in the northern parts of China, places like Shanxi, Shandong, and Hebei provinces. And usually, there are two main types. The first is between two people who have both passed away before marriage. What happened is, a matchmaker, or sometimes even a professional broker, would step in. They would find a suitable match between two families, maybe a young woman and a young man who both died too early. At the wedding, their photos and specially made dolls would be placed at the altar, standing in for the bride and groom. And like any traditional wedding, there would be a bride price, a dowry. Though here, it's all in form of paper tributes that would later be burned. Sometimes a feng shui master would even be brought in to pick the best match, based on age, background, family energy, because even the dead deserved a proper match, right? And if, for whatever reason, the spirit of the bride or groom didn't approve the match, it was said that the family could end up haunted. Nightmares, strange occurrences, until they found a match that made the spirit happy. Once everything was agreed on, the final step would be to literally dig up the woman's grave, collect her bones, and move them into the grave of her new husband. Their souls now united forever. The second type, well, this one's a little more unsettling. It involved living people marrying the dead. Usually it was with living women, though occasionally, very rarely, a living man might be involved. The ceremony would look pretty normal at a glance: wedding clothes, offerings, and a photo of the deceased standing in for the missing bride or groom. But why would someone do this? Well, a lot of it had to do with family lineage, something still deeply important in Chinese culture. Traditionally, the family name, the whole bloodline, is carried through the sons. If a family lost their only son, it was devastating, not just emotionally, but culturally, because it meant the end of the family line. So sometimes, if a son died young, even if he had a fiancé, the family would ask the girl if she would still marry him. And if she agreed, she would become part of the family. She would help take care of his parents like a real daughter-in-law. And a family could adopt a grandson to carry on the bloodline. Of course, this wasn't cheap. The woman's family would usually demand a high price, kind of like a dowry, but for a ghost marriage. And honestly, it was mostly rich families who could afford to do this. It wasn't just about tradition. It was about survival, keeping the family name, the family honor alive, even if it meant marrying a living soul to a memory. But here is the thing. Just because a woman became a daughter-in-law through a ghost marriage didn't mean her life suddenly turned into rainbows and flowers. Not even close. Even if there was money involved, even if her family gained something, her own life, it was pretty much over. She was expected to live a lonely life, forever loyal to a husband who wasn't even alive. No falling in love again, no remarriage. Her entire purpose became serving her husband's family and eventually helping them adopt an heir. And the adoption wasn't random either. Usually, the family would pick a boy who was already related by blood, like the son of the deceased man's brother. They would draw up a formal contract laid beneath the dead man's ancestral tablet, and just like that, the lineage was saved. The adopted son would now be expected to make offerings every year on the deceased father's birthday and death day. And eventually, he would inherit the family's estate as the sole heir. What if the one who died wasn't a son? What if it was a daughter? That's where things get even more complicated, and honestly, even sadder. In traditional Chinese homes, the ancestral altar, the space where you honor your ancestors, was only for paternal ancestors. Married women, their tablets were placed at their husband's family altar, not their own. But if a woman died unmarried, their family couldn't even put up her tablet properly. Instead, they would make a temporary paper tablet and shove it into some lonely corner near the door because, by tradition, an unmarried woman had no descendants to honor her. No family line to continue, and sometimes she was even seen as a bad omen, a source of shame. And some families believed having an unmarried daughter die under their roof would bring terrible luck. So when an unmarried daughter fell sick and near death, they would quietly move her out into a shed or a death house or some abandoned building just so she wouldn't die at home, alone, forgotten. Can you imagine? In some cases, women who didn't want to marry at all would agree to something called a bride-initiated spirit marriage. Basically choosing to marry a spirit so they could stay single, but still have their place in the lineage. Even then, people would still look down on them, still judge them. And not all ghost marriages were peaceful or voluntary either. Sometimes the spirit of the dead would choose their own bride. Families would say things like, "My son always liked a certain type." And when matchmakers tried arranging marriages between spirits, sometimes one spirit would refuse, flat out reject the match. And when a spirit rejected a match, it wasn't subtle. The family of the rejected bride, or sometimes even the family of the deceased sisters, would suddenly start experiencing misfortune, random sickness, bad luck after bad luck, illnesses that no doctor could cure. And when that happened, the families would turn to spirituality. Through seances, they'd learn that the restless spirit had chosen someone. And if the living didn't agree, the misfortunes would just keep coming. In some stories, the spirit would even appear in someone's dream, calling out a name, showing a face, saying clearly, "That is the one I want to marry." But think about it, even if a spirit appeared in a dream, picking out someone they wanted to marry, convincing a real living person to actually go through it, it is not easy, right? In those cases, the families would do whatever they could to make it actually happen. They would offer huge amounts of money, basically trying to buy the person's life. Or if it didn't work, they would turn to spiritual mediums to beg the dead to change their mind and pick someone else instead. Most of the time, these families had already spent a fortune hiring high-end matchmakers. And yeah, matchmaking for the dead, it was a huge business. Back in the 90s, arranging a ghost marriage would cost about 5,000 yen, roughly $700. By the early 2000s, that price jumped to around 50,000 yen. And by 2016, you would be looking at 150,000 yen, which is around $21,000, just to arrange a ghost wedding. And with that much money flying around, well, it's no surprise that things started to get shady. Dead bodies, especially the bodies of young women, became a commodity. They were bought, sold, traded, all under the table, all in the name of ghost marriages. At that point, it wasn't even about traditions anymore. It was human trafficking. And sadly, that is exactly what happened. Because In modern China, most people didn't believe in these old superstitions anymore. Families would refuse to sell their child's corpse or participate in a ghost wedding. So, what did the matchmakers do? Some of them turned to murder. In 2016, a man from Gansu province killed 2 women who were mentally ill and then sold their bodies for ghost marriages. He was caught, and in 2021, he was sentenced to death. But that wasn't an isolated case. In 2019, the ashes of a woman named Fang Yangyang were used in a ghost wedding after she had been tortured to death by her own in-laws. And in 2021, in Shandong province, a funeral home employee stole the ashes of a young internet celebrity known as Little Kitty and sold them off for another ghost marriage. It wasn't just in mainland China. In Taiwan, they had their own version of ghost marriages called, I don't know if this is the right pronunciation, but Qi Shen Zhu, literally meaning marrying the spirit tablet. For a dead son, the process looked similar to the Chinese tradition, but for a woman, it was quite different, and honestly, even creepier. The family would place a red envelope filled with cash, paper money, or sometimes even the woman's hair or nails on a road. And whoever picked it up, congratulations, you just accidentally agreed to marry a ghost bride. And refusing wasn't a simple no thanks either. It was believed that saying no would bring you serious bad luck. Now, some people did manage to slip away and dodge this marriage, but not always. And that's when things started crossing into even darker territory, into trafficking and crime. Take the case of Miao Taijiang in 2016. He wanted a ghost bride for his nephew. So he contacted a guy named Hu Alian, who said he knew someone back in his hometown, a girl who was sick, bedridden, and whose family was looking to sell her body. So they agreed on a price, 32,000 yuan, which is about $4,700 for a woman they called Zhao Mai. The body was transported to Miao's place. The ghost wedding was set for July 4th, 2016, around 7 p.m. It looked like a normal ghost marriage. The spirit tablet, the ashes, mannequins representing the bride and groom. The heavy scent of incense and flowers filled the room, almost choking the air while the matchmaker chanted prayers, binding the 2 souls together. But something was off, because instead of just using ashes or dolls, the girl's body was placed inside a closed casket, and no one was allowed to open it. And people thought it was strange. Usually, if the bride was still alive, she would either attend the ceremony in person or be represented by a doll. But this time, a closed coffin, no explanation. When the ceremony ended, they prepared to bury them together. But as the men tried to lift the coffin, they heard something, a tiny, almost inaudible thud. At first, they thought they imagined it, but when they pressed their hands against the coffin, they felt it, a soft, weak kick, movement, someone was still alive inside. Panic spread fast. They pried open the coffin, and inside, there she was, a young girl, pale, tears streaming down her cheeks, gasping for air, still alive. The room exploded into chaos. Some people ran to help her. Others called the police. She had been sold into death while she was still breathing. When the police started digging deeper into the case, they found out something even worse. Hu, the so-called acquaintance, wasn't some distant family friend trying to help. He was a human trafficker. And the family he called Mai's family They weren't her family at all. They were part of a trafficking ring, one that targeted the most vulnerable, people with mental disabilities or travelers with no local ties. They would offer shelter to these people and then abduct them. Anyone who looked Chinese enough, even if they were a foreigner, could be kidnapped off the street, taken to remote places, hidden, and sold like property. When a family paid for a body, traffickers would sedate the victim heavily, then tell the buyers she just passed away last night. That's why the body is still warm. Or they would simply seal them inside a coffin and tell everyone, don't open it. And once the burial happened, the victim would be left to die, buried alive, suffocating in the darkness, 6 feet under, without anyone ever realizing it. When Miao was questioned about Mai, he said he didn't know she was still alive. He blamed the cold rain, saying everything felt cold, even her. He admitted to drugging her, a lethal dose, and when she didn't respond, he nailed the coffin shut without checking twice. The case was sent to court, but after that, not much news ever came out. And Mai herself, she couldn't even testify because she was deaf and mute. Communication with her was almost impossible. The Chinese government has been trying to crack down on these horrors. Officially, if someone is caught stealing, desecrating, or abusing a corpse, they can face up to 3 years in prison. But you have to wonder, is 3 years really enough to stop something this dark, this cruel? And the truth is, cases like this, they weren't rare. Reports of human trafficking tied to ghost marriages aren't widely available. Many are hidden, buried just like the victims. There were even rumors that some traffickers harvested the victims' organs before selling their bodies for ghost weddings. Even people who were already buried, their graves could be robbed overnight, the bodies disappearing into the black market without a trace. And as long as the demand for ghost marriages exists, the nightmare doesn't end. In the end, stories like this remind us of something much scarier than any ghost. The real monsters aren't the spirits, it's human beings themselves. Okay, so that is the end of today's story. Interesting, right? But really dark. So thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it or if it creeped you out a little, make sure to stick around. I've got plenty more for you guys. See you next time. Bye.